Stop wasting your life, disconnected, and learn to hear the messages. The universe sends you every single day. There are moments in life when everything around you keeps moving, yet something inside you feels strangely still, almost suspended in a quiet discomfort you cannot name. You go through the motions of living, answering messages, fulfilling obligations, meeting expectations, but underneath all the noise, a subtle ache starts to rise, an ache that reminds you that you have been functioning, not truly living. This feeling is not a flaw, nor a sign of weakness. It is often the first whisper from the universe, inviting you to stop long enough to notice how far you've drifted from your own essence, your own truth, and the deeper meaning your soul has been longing to return to. Most people believe they are suffering because they lack clarity, yet the real wound comes from the absence of presence. The universe rarely speaks in dramatic revelations. It speaks through nuance, through emotions you suppress, memories that insist on resurfacing, coincidences that feel too precise to be random, and dreams that linger long after you wake. When you insist on surviving instead of living, you build layers of inner noise that completely suffocate this sacred dialogue. This video is an invitation to remove those layers, not to become perfect, but to become aware. It is a space where intuition sharpens, wisdom softens you, and the universe finally has room to speak. Before we enter the deeper chapters ahead, take a breath and acknowledge something important. You have already received countless signs, even if you talked yourself out of believing in them. Now, for the first time in a long time, you are ready to stop wasting your life in disconnection and to begin hearing the guidance the universe has been offering you every single day. The silent weight of living, disconnected. There is a particular kind of heaviness that enters a person's life when they have been disconnected from themselves for too long. It is not the heaviness that comes from exhaustion or physical strain. It is the quiet, persistent weight that appears when the soul realizes it has been unattended, unheard, and overlooked. Many people describe this feeling as a subtle emptiness, a sense that something essential has slipped out of reach. It shows up in the spaces between conversations, in the quiet moments before sleep, and in those unexpected pauses during the day when your mind drifts and you suddenly realize you're no longer sure who you are becoming. This disconnection is not dramatic at first. It accumulates slowly, like dust settling over something once luminous, masking its brilliance while keeping its shape intact. For some, this disconnection begins after a loss that was never fully processed. A separation, the death of someone important, or even the collapse of a dream can create a fracture inside that no one else can see. Instead of being guided into healing, many feel pressured to continue on as if nothing happened. They function, work, smile, respond, and fulfill responsibilities, yet a part of them remains standing at the moment of the wound, unable to move forward. That internal divide becomes a barrier, making the world feel distant and the self feel muted. When the days stretch out in front of you like a road you are no longer sure you want to walk, it becomes harder to feel guided, harder to believe that the universe is communicating anything at all, and harder still to imagine that your life could return to meaning. For others, the disconnection emerges from years of living in autopilot. They wake up, follow the same routine, repeat the same thoughts, respond to the same worries, and chase the same goals without remembering why those goals mattered in the first place. Time begins to blur. Days fold into weeks, weeks into months, and suddenly the realization rises. You have been present in your schedule but absent in your spirit. This emptiness does not come from a lack of productivity. It comes from a lack of alignment. There is a difference between a life that is full and a life that is yours. When the mind becomes mechanical, the heart becomes silent, and the voice of the universe, which depends on your sensitivity and presence, becomes nearly impossible to hear. Many people blame themselves for this state, believing that something is wrong with them for not feeling inspired, connected, or spiritually awake. But this disconnection is not a personal failure. It is a human experience. It appears when you ignore the inner signals that something needs to change. The exhaustion you have normalized, the irritability you have pushed aside, the sadness you have tried to rationalize, and the intuition you have repeatedly dismissed are not flaws. They are messages. They are attempts of the universe to reach you through the only language it can use when you are not paying attention: discomfort. When you feel emotionally drained without reason, when people and places begin to feel misaligned, or when your inner world becomes heavier than your outer responsibilities. The universe is not abandoning you, it is calling you back to yourself. What deepens the disconnection is the belief that you must hide these feelings to be functional. In a world that demands constant performance, vulnerability becomes something people silence, even from themselves. But emotional silence creates spiritual silence. When you lock away your sadness, your confusion, and your longing for something more, you inadvertently lock away the very part of you that is capable of receiving guidance. The soul does not respond to pressure, it responds to honesty. And until you begin to acknowledge what hurts, the universe cannot show you what needs healing. There is another layer to this experience, the fear of wasting life. Many adults carry the quiet terror of aging without having lived meaningfully, of reaching the end of their days feeling that they never discovered why they were here. This fear does not always manifest as panic. Sometimes it appears as boredom, sometimes as restlessness, sometimes as an inability to feel satisfaction, even in moments that should feel joyful. When you are disconnected from your essence, nothing feels fully real. Joy becomes fleeting, purpose becomes vague, and intuition becomes distant. You begin to question whether the universe is still speaking to you or whether it has somehow gone silent. But the truth is that the universe never stops communicating. What changes is your ability to listen. There are individuals who describe this phase as if they were walking through their own lives as a visitor rather than a participant, observing themselves from a distance. This creates an internal split. One part of you watches while the other part performs. This fragmentation makes decisions feel heavier, relationships feel uncertain, and the future feel foggy. It steals the sense of belonging, even in familiar spaces. Without realizing it, you begin to search for something undefined, an answer, a sign, a path, or even a feeling that can prove you are still connected to something greater. But searching externally for what has been lost internally only expands the void. Yet the disconnection itself is not the final state, it is an invitation. It is the universe shaking the foundation of your life gently, urging you to examine what has been abandoned within you. When everything feels muted, when your intuition grows faint, when your daily experience becomes predictable and numb, you are being guided toward a deeper reconnection. The ache you feel is the doorway. The confusion is the threshold. The longing is the map. There is something within you that remembers who you were before the noise, the wounds, and the expectations dimmed your clarity. That memory is not lost. It is simply buried under years of survival, and the universe is constantly trying to help you uncover it. The question is not whether the universe is sending messages. The question is whether you are ready to hear what those messages reveal about the life you are living and the life you were meant to step into. The hidden patterns that silence the universe's guidance. There are moments in life when you feel as though the world has grown strangely quiet around you, not because there is an absence of sound, but because there is an absence of direction. You look for meaning in conversations, in memories, in decisions, and sometimes even in the smallest coincidences, hoping something will stand out as a sign. Yet nothing seems to speak clearly. This silence does not come from the universe withholding guidance. It comes from a subtle web of internal patterns that slowly, quietly, and persistently weaken your ability to perceive what has always been there. These patterns are rarely dramatic. They are woven into the rhythm of your days, into the stories you tell yourself, and into the emotions you try to suppress because facing them feels too heavy. One of these patterns begins forming the moment you start doubting your inner voice. Every time you sense a feeling, a thought, or an intuition rising and you immediately dismiss it, you reinforce a cycle of internal disbelief. You teach your mind that your deeper knowing is unreliable, irrational, or unimportant. Over time, this becomes a kind of internal self-abandonment. The more you silence that voice, the more distant it becomes, until eventually you begin to rely solely on logic, fear, comparison, and external validation. When you live only through the mind and disconnect from the inner self, the guidance of the universe becomes difficult to detect because it often speaks through the very voice you have been taught to ignore. Another pattern emerges when you carry unresolved emotional weight. Pain that has never been acknowledged creates static inside you, grief that was rushed, anger that was repressed, guilt that was never expressed, or sadness that you convinced yourself you should be over by now, all become emotional shadows that linger. These shadows distort perception. They make neutral situations feel heavy, opportunities feel unsafe, and intuition feel unreliable. When the heart is clouded with unprocessed emotion, the signals from the universe are easily mistaken for noise. You begin to interpret guidance as hesitation, synchronicities as coincidence, and inner nudges as anxiety. Without realizing it, the unresolved past becomes the lens through which you interpret the present. There is also the subtle pattern of living through external expectations. Throughout life, many people are conditioned to prioritize what others believe is right for them. They listen to family, society, culture, or even the assumptions of strangers more than they listen to their own inner compass. When you shape your life around these external beliefs, you may appear successful or functional, but internally you feel a constant pull, a quiet misalignment that never fully settles. This misalignment blocks spiritual clarity because the universe speaks in the language of authenticity. It aligns with the version of you that is true, not the version you perform for acceptance. When you walk too far in the direction others expect, the voice of guidance feels harder to hear, not because it went silent, but porque você se afastou da sua própria frequência. A different pattern forms when you begin to live in emotional survival mode. When life becomes a series of responsibilities, worries, and tasks, the nervous system shifts into a state of constant alertness. In this state, your mind becomes rigid, tracking threats, anticipating problems, and focusing on what could go wrong. While this state may help you navigate stressful moments, it also narrows your perception. It leaves no space for wonder, curiosity, or subtlety. Messages from the universe are rarely loud. They require a level of presence that survival mode cannot provide. When you are living in a state of constant defense, you are unable to interpret anything beyond the immediate demands of the moment. Spiritual intuition needs openness, but survival mode closes everything. There is also the pattern of emotional numbing, a quiet but powerful barrier between you and your spiritual intuition. When life becomes overwhelming, many people unconsciously numb themselves with distractions. They fill every free moment with screens, tasks, noise, entertainment, or anything that keeps them from sitting alone with their feelings. Distraction may offer temporary relief, but it disconnects you from the subtle inner shifts that carry messages. When you constantly seek stimulation, you lose the capacity to hear what arises in silence. The universe often speaks in the gaps between distractions, and when those gaps disappear, the messages do too. Another hidden pattern appears through self-sabotage, especially when you are close to a breakthrough. Many individuals fear the responsibility that comes with clarity. When you realize what needs to change, you also realize what you can no longer ignore. This truth can be uncomfortable, so instead of embracing it, people unconsciously create crises, confusion, or delays that allow them to avoid transformation. They call it bad timing, lack of energy, or not being ready, but often it is a fear of stepping into the unknown. The universe cannot guide someone who insists on staying within the familiar, even when the familiar is painful. Self-sabotage blocks spiritual signals because it places fear above intuition and comfort above truth. Some patterns come from doubt, not the doubt you express verbally, but the doubt you carry in silence. When you doubt your worth, doubt that you deserve guidance, doubt that change is possible, or doubt that the universe cares about your journey, you create a vibrational barrier. Guidance requires openness. Doubt shrinks the space where openness lives. Many people do not recognize this doubt because it does not always sound like negativity. Sometimes it sounds rational, sometimes it disguises itself as caution, but beneath it lies a fear of disappointment. If you expect nothing, you cannot be let down. Yet expecting nothing also means you do not allow anything meaningful to enter. Doubt is one of the most silent and powerful barriers to intuitive clarity. There is also the pattern of emotional overstimulation. In a world where information never stops, many people lose touch with their inner rhythm. Their thoughts move too fast, their emotions shift too quickly, and their attention is constantly scattered. The mind becomes loud, and when the mind is loud, intuition becomes faint. Guidance requires stillness, but overstimulation creates turbulence. This turbulence leads to misinterpretation. What feels urgent might simply be noise. What feels confusing might be clarity trying to break through. What feels random might be a pattern forming. But when overstimulation dominates the inner world, everything becomes harder to discern. Finally, there exists the pattern of believing that guidance should appear in extraordinary ways. Many individuals expect signs to be dramatic, unmistakable, and almost miraculous. They forget that the universe is subtle, precise, and gentle. It communicates through intuition, through the right person appearing at the right moment, through the timing of events, through dreams, emotions, insights, and even discomfort. When you expect something grandiose, you dismiss the small signs that guide you day after day. You overlook the whisper while searching for thunder. These hidden patterns do not make you flawed, they make you human. Every person carries some combination of them, and each one has shaped your perception in ways you may never have noticed. But becoming aware of them marks the beginning of transformation. Once you start recognizing how these patterns influence your ability to hear, feel, and understand guidance, the silence you once feared begins to dissolve. In its place, something new emerges, a softening, a clarity, a sense of homecoming within yourself. When the universe speaks through subtle currents, there are seasons in life when guidance does not arrive through clarity, certainty, or revelation, but through the gentlest currents moving beneath your awareness. These currents appear in moments when you least expect them. The instant a memory resurfaces for no apparent reason, the quiet shift in your breathing when you think about a particular path, the sudden heaviness you feel around someone who once felt familiar, or even the strange sense of peace that shows up when you consider a choice that scares you. These are the moments most people overlook because they are not loud enough to command attention. Yet these are often the exact moments when the universe is speaking most directly. Many individuals expect guidance to feel like conviction, but more often it begins as a whisper, a soft recognition that something is aligning or misaligning. This whisper is not dramatic. It does not force itself into your awareness. Instead, it waits for you to notice. It waits for a moment of presence, a moment when your mind quiets enough for your inner senses to awaken. When people say they feel disconnected, it is rarely because the universe stopped speaking. It is because they stopped noticing how delicately it communicates. The subtlety is not a flaw in the design, it is part of the sacredness. For guidance to be truly understood, it must be received through presence, not pressure. There are times when guidance takes the form of inner resistance. Resistance is often misinterpreted as fear or doubt, but in many cases, it is the body's way of signaling that something is out of alignment on a deeper level. This resistance does not always manifest as a loud no. Sometimes it is a faint discomfort that lingers after a conversation, a strange fatigue that follows a decision, or a tension in the chest when you consider continuing down a certain path. The body is one of the universe's most reliable instruments. It speaks through sensation long before the mind can articulate meaning. When you ignore these sensations, you silence a language that has been guiding you since the beginning of your life. In contrast, there are moments when guidance arrives as expansion. Expansion can feel like a soft warmth spreading through your chest, a lightness in your breathing, or a stability that settles into your body even when the choice ahead feels unfamiliar. People often assume that fear means something is wrong, but fear can exist even when something is right. Expansion is not the absence of fear, it is the presence of alignment. The universe speaks through the inner opening that occurs when your deeper self recognizes a path meant for you, even if your mind has not yet caught up. Sometimes guidance arrives through repetition. Themes begin to echo through your days. You repeatedly encounter a phrase, a symbol, a name, an idea, or an opportunity. Repetition is not coincidence, it is invitation. It signals that something in your reality is shifting, preparing you for a new direction. When the same message appears through different channels, the universe is reinforcing a conversation that you may have been too distracted to hear the first time. These repetitions create a bridge between your conscious mind and your intuitive awareness, slowly guiding you toward what needs your attention. There are also moments when guidance is delivered through timing. Something delays, something arrives too quickly, something dissolves before you can grasp it, something appears precisely when you needed it, but before you knew you did. Timing can feel frustrating because it rarely aligns with your expectations. Yet timing is one of the universe's clearest forms of communication. When a door closes despite your efforts to keep it open, it is not punishment, it is redirection. When something unfolds with ease and flow, it is not luck, it is resonance. The universe uses timing the way nature uses seasons. Each change serves a purpose that becomes visible only when viewed with patience. Guidance can also emerge through relationships. Some people enter your life briefly, yet leave a deep imprint on your awareness. Others remain for years, but create a subtle shrinking within you every time you interact. The universe often speaks through the energy exchange between you and others. A sense of heaviness may indicate that your spirit is outgrowing a dynamic. A sense of inspiration may signal alignment with the future you are becoming. Relationships are mirrors. They reflect your wounds, your patterns, your evolution, and your potential. The clarity they offer is not always comfortable, but it is always meaningful. Then, there is the guidance that arrives through silence. This is the form of communication most misunderstood. When nothing seems to move, when no signs appear, when everything feels uncertain, you may assume that you have lost your connection. But silence often means integration. It means you have already received the guidance needed for this moment, and now the universe is creating space for you to embody it. Silence is where clarity settles, where inner strength forms, and where the next step builds quietly beneath the surface. In these pauses, something within you reorganizes itself, preparing for alignment that cannot occur through noise. There are times when guidance comes disguised as discomfort. People often assume that discomfort is a sign to stop, but discomfort is frequently the first signal that you are reaching the edge of an old identity. Growth rarely begins with ease. It begins with friction. The universe sometimes uses discomfort to pull you out of places that no longer nourish your spirit. It uses restlessness to draw your attention to what you have outgrown. It uses dissatisfaction to guide you toward paths you have not considered. This discomfort is not the universe hurting you. It is the universe urging movement. Finally, the universe speaks through the deep knowing that emerges only when all external voices fade. This knowing does not rush. It does not shout. It does not demand immediate action. It rises slowly, like dawn light illuminating a room. You feel it before you understand it. You sense it before you can explain it. It is the voice that remains when confusion dissolves. It is not shaped by fear, expectation, or pressure. It is shaped by truth. And truth speaks softly because it does not compete. It simply is. The subtle currents of guidance are always present. They weave through your days with precision and compassion, waiting for the moment when you become still enough to notice. When you begin to recognize these currents, the world no longer feels silent. Instead, it becomes a living conversation, unfolding gently, thoughtfully, and consistently, not through force, but through presence. The inner landscape. Where universal messages take shape, there is an inner landscape within every human being that shapes the way guidance is received, interpreted, and embodied. This landscape is not physical. It is emotional, intuitive, and energetic. It is formed by your memories, shaped by your wounds, colored by your desires, and softened by your moments of honesty. When this landscape becomes cluttered, the messages of the universe reach you distorted, muffled, or incompletely. When it becomes spacious, those same messages arrive with clarity, depth, and unmistakable resonance. Understanding the terrain of your inner world is essential, because guidance is not something you merely receive. It is something you translate through the state of your consciousness. This inner landscape begins forming long before adulthood. Experiences from childhood shape the way you interpret signals. If you grew up in an environment where intuition was dismissed, emotional expression was discouraged, or sensitivity was misunderstood, then a part of you learned that inner knowing is risky. You may have internalized the belief that your feelings are unreliable or that your instincts are exaggerated. As a result, even when the universe speaks to you, a subtle voice immediately questions or invalidates what you feel. This doubt becomes a filter through which every intuitive message passes, diluting its meaning before it reaches your awareness. As life progresses, emotional wounds imprint themselves on this landscape. A heartbreak, a betrayal, a major loss, or a season of loneliness can create deep impressions that reshape the way you perceive guidance. Pain tends to leave behind echoes that interfere with intuitive clarity. When you consider a new direction, your mind may no longer be responding to the present moment, but to the past wound. You may mistake a new opportunity for a threat simply because it resembles something that once caused you harm. In this way, Unresolved pain becomes a lens, bending the light of guidance into patterns that reflect old fears instead of new truths. There are also the inner walls you build to protect yourself from further hurt. These walls may have been necessary at certain times in your life, but they can become barriers that prevent intuition from flowing freely. A heart that is heavily guarded cannot differentiate between fear and misalignment. A mind that is constantly bracing for disappointment cannot recognize when the universe is offering something meaningful. These inner walls create an emotional rigidity that restricts the fluid movement of intuition. The universe speaks through openness, yet many people unknowingly live behind protections born from old pain. Another element shaping this landscape is your belief system. Beliefs operate like inner architecture. They define what feels possible, believable, or safe. If you hold the belief that life is indifferent, you will interpret signals through skepticism. If you believe that you are not worthy of receiving guidance, you will unconsciously push away every sign that appears. If you hold the belief that the universe is always supporting you, the same situations will be interpreted with trust and receptivity. The beliefs you inherited or adopted over time either soften the soil of your inner landscape or harden it, determining how deeply guidance can take root. Beyond beliefs, emotional patterns have a profound influence on how messages form inside you. Anxiety, for example, creates constant mental noise. When anxiety dominates, inner signals become lost within imagined scenarios and fears of the future. Intuition becomes difficult to distinguish from anticipation of danger. Similarly, chronic self-doubt causes intuitive insights to be questioned the moment they arise. Instead of listening, you begin negotiating with yourself, arguing with your inner wisdom until it grows quiet again. Sadness, on the other hand, can soften perception, making you more introspective but also more vulnerable to interpreting neutral situations symbolically. None of these emotions are wrong, but they shape the terrain through which guidance must travel. There are periods in life when you experience emotional numbness. Numbness is not the absence of feeling, it is the consequence of too much feeling for too long. When the heart becomes tired, it withdraws into a protective silence. In these periods, guidance may feel distant, not because it is absent, but because you are operating through emotional frost. The universe may be sending messages, but your inner world is too cold for those messages to take shape. In these moments, clarity must first thaw the inner ice. This happens gradually, through small acknowledgements, slow breaths, and the return of sensations you had stopped noticing. As your emotional world warms, intuition begins returning like spring ground emerging after winter. Contrast this with moments of genuine presence. When you are grounded in your body, connected to your breath, and attentive to your surroundings, your inner landscape becomes receptive. Presence clears away mental fog and emotional turbulence. It opens space for guidance to form naturally, without interference. In these moments, intuition does not require effort. It rises effortlessly, like a quiet certainty that needs no explanation. Presence creates an internal environment where messages from the universe can echo clearly, without distortion. Dreams are another part of the inner landscape where messages take shape. Dreams bypass the conscious mind and communicate through symbols, sensations, and emotional impressions. Often, your dreams reveal truths you were not ready to see while awake. They illuminate fears, desires, or directions that your rational mind has been avoiding. The universe frequently uses dreams to bypass resistance and deliver guidance directly to the deeper layers of your consciousness. When your dream life becomes active or symbolic, it is often a sign that your inner landscape is preparing for change. An equally important aspect of this terrain is your relationship with stillness. Stillness is where intuitive echoes become audible. Yet many people fear stillness because it exposes everything they have avoided. It reveals loneliness, unresolved emotions, and truths you may not feel prepared to confront. But stillness is also where your clarity grows strongest. When you allow yourself to sit in quiet, the inner world begins to reorganize itself. Thoughts settle, emotions soften, and the deeper voice within begins to rise again. Stillness does not produce guidance. It reveals the guidance already present. Lastly, your inner landscape is shaped by the extent to which you trust yourself. Self-trust is the soil where intuitive messages either take root or fade. When you trust yourself, even the faintest inner signal becomes meaningful. When you distrust yourself, even the strongest signs become questionable. Trust is not a trait, it is a relationship. And like any relationship, it deepens with honesty, consistency, and patience. The universe can guide you, but only you can cultivate the inner ground where that guidance becomes truth. When you begin to understand the terrain within you, guidance no longer feels random. You see how each message interacts with your fears, hopes, patterns, and memories. You realize that hearing the universe is not just about listening outwardly, it is about knowing the landscape where those messages land. And when that landscape becomes clear, spacious, and alive again, the messages that once felt distant begin to resonate with unmistakable clarity. There comes a moment in every spiritual journey when something inside you becomes undeniably clear. The universe was never silent, never distant, never indifferent. Every breath, every shift in emotion, every unexpected encounter, every period of confusion, every surge of intuition, and every moment of stillness has been part of an ongoing conversation. What you have explored throughout this journey is not a method for forcing answers, but a way of remembering how to listen, how to soften the inner world so guidance can move through you with the precision and tenderness that has always been there. The life you long for does not emerge from external noise or frantic searching. It emerges from the quiet recognition that meaning forms within you first. When you learn to observe the emotional patterns that shape your perception, when you create space for stillness rather than filling every moment with distraction, and when you allow the inner currents of intuition to rise without resistance, something begins to shift. You no longer experience your days as a random sequence of events, but as a tapestry woven with intention, insight, and direction. Reconnection is not a sudden transformation. It is a return, a gentle return to your own depth, honesty, and presence. It is the moment you stop running from yourself and begin honoring the sensations, memories, longings, and quiet truths that have been waiting to be acknowledged. When you step into that awareness, the messages of the universe no longer feel hidden. They become threads guiding you toward the life you were meant to inhabit. You may not have all the answers yet, and you do not need them. What you have now is awareness. Awareness of the inner landscape where guidance takes shape. Awareness of the subtle patterns that once blocked your clarity, and awareness of the silent language through which the universe speaks. This awareness is the beginning of transformation. From here, the path ahead becomes illuminated one step at a time, precisely when you are ready to take each step. Your journey back to connection has already begun. Before you leave this moment of reflection, ask yourself something honestly. What part of your life has been quietly calling for your attention, but you have been afraid to listen? If this video touched something inside you, if it helped you recognize even one truth you had forgotten, I invite you to stay connected with this journey. Subscribe to the channel so you don't lose the guidance, the conversations, and the depth that continue unfolding here week after week. Your presence here matters. And don't stop now. Your next step is already waiting. Continue watching the next video that's appearing on your screen. Let this transformation keep expanding. Let the universe continue speaking to you, one insight at a time.